Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Friday at about 11:30. Pretty rainy day. Expected. I heard last night or saw last night it was supposed to rain. So yeah, it's the weather has been nice. Had some batches of the weather. I've had a big break, vacation here from school because the summer session from where I work ended about a week or two ago. So I've had a bunch of time off. So it's been pretty nice. And yesterday I went to the beach, so that was really cool. I went to the beach and spent a good chunk of the day there. It was a beautiful day, so that was really nice. And but then I saw that the forecast for today, and I'm not sure if the weekend for this weekend it's not looking good. It's raining right now, but it's kind of a given thing at this point, with the rain and the weather. It's been pretty unprecedented. So, but it is what it is. So it's been a lot of fun. I've been trying to bring some more variety to this channel. Got a few new subscribers and some new folks that have been jumping on board and also commenting on these videos. Very, very cool. Super cool. So, it's a funny thing. Like since I've been doing this show, I've always, when I first discovered YouTube, I remember it was probably like 10 years ago. It was really funny. I don't know, might have even been more longer than that, but I remember when it was and the time and place and everything. It was, it was, it was something else because I remember I had a gig. I had a gig in Belfast. I was playing a gig somewhere at this restaurant or something, and this bass player that I was playing the gig with, we were talking about music or something, and he said, "Hey, have you checked out YouTube?" And I was like, "What is that?" Um, and he showed me, and he's like, "Yeah, it's videos. It's a channel that's comprised of videos of, interviews, little clips of like random things that happen, concerts, all these things." And I was like, "Wow, what is that?" I was like a caveman or something discovering fire. And I remember that night I looked it up on my computer, and I was just blown away. I was enamored by it. And one of the things that I was so blown away by, and one of the first things I did was I basically started looking up bands and drummers that I love, and I found all of these videos of them performing, and I kind of couldn't believe it. Like people that I have listened to for years and years, even at that point, but I never saw what they actually looked like or what they sounded like live. And suddenly I was like, holy mackerel. And, it's kind of an amazing learning tool. I've also realized too that YouTube can be an utter kind of rabbit hole or black hole of you know, where you can completely waste your time. But I think overall it's more beneficial than anything. Like I think anything dealing with technology, well, with anything, I think there's always pros and cons, and there's always positive and negative with pretty much everything that we deal with on a daily basis. But I think with the digital age that we're in and with computers and technology, there's obviously, I think both sides to those ways of looking at things are to a degree like ramped up. But I overall think that there's more positive coming out of coming out of the emergence of where technology is, because you can, really, really, I discover music and movies at a quicker rate now than I ever did. I definitely think, back with music, talking about music for a second. When I grew up and I was discovering bands and I was a kid, like in my early, I was in middle school, high school when I first got into lots of bands and things like that. I found out, about bands through, other friends, but then it was also during the time of like fanzines and tape trading, where people who were fans of a particular band or a particular style, they would kind of basically act as, to a degree, like makeshift journalists. They would create these little magazines and have these little write-ups about bands, and then get in correspondence with other people that were, you know, into the same kind of thing, and then tape trading would, and that's how you would send things back and forth in the mail, and that's how like information was shared as far as new music and things like that. That's how I remember, you know, hearing about bands. And I, at that time, I got turned on to, hundreds, if not thousands, of bands at a young age. But I think now with the internet, you know, it's kind of the same thing. Only I think it's a quicker process. There's even less, there's less borders, and you can, because of the sheer amount of content, it can be daunting or overwhelming, and you have to sift through even more stuff. But I don't know, it's really about the same. I remember back when I was discovering bands when I was a kid, there would be, hundreds of bands that you would be in contact with or kind of discover, and you would kind of sift through the stuff. And the same thing with internet, with the YouTube craze, or just online correspondence with other people. It's the same kind of thing, or just randomly discovering a group. It's almost the same thing, but I definitely feel that it's at a more rapid rate. But, I also feel that with technology and everything, it's also um, overwhelming. It can increase, I think psychologically, it can also have some negative effects of where there is, you know, less human interaction to a degree. It's a little bit less personal. With the tape trading thing, you wrote letters, or you actually picked up the phone, and it was distant. You were communicating with people from a distance, but it also had a higher human quality because you were like writing letters. You would exchange numbers, um, and then sometimes you would meet that person, especially if they lived in the state that you lived in, which I remember being was a big thing. So it was a little bit more personal. Where now it's less personal, although you can discover, I think, more music and more films. That's the sole way of how I discover new bands and new films now, is through the internet. So, and I think that's a given. That's a thing for everyone. But there's an abundance of a lot of crap. There's an abundance of people out there who, everybody is a critic. Everybody is looked at where they, I don't know, pat themselves on the back that they are an authority figure, and that they also, another thing is that there is more negativity. I think I see people on YouTube, especially guys and girls, mostly with guys, who create a channel or some kind of website where they're talking about music or movies or something, but it's all about them kind of attacking one particular thing, or where they use a lot of profanity, and when they upload a clip or a show, they typically try to make it really provocative, so it garners attention and controversy. So that's a thing that's very different. Um, because people are, I look at it a lot of the times like the scenario of when you're driving somewhere and there's a car accident, an unfortunate accident happens, and our immediate response is to kind of slow down and see what the hell's going on. But it grabs our attention, and to a degree, it's like weirdly exciting. So there's that, and I feel that people like I don't know, they call it clickbait, to a degree, but it's a negative. The negative thing is also the negative presentation or headline is what's used for you know to garner interest, to where you're going to be trashing something or attacking something. So it's a strange time that way. So there's a negative kind of cloud around it. Not for everyone. It's not everything, but that's a part of it. So it's pretty strange. I had a really weird experience the other day where there's one guy who I like quite a bit, and he has a record label, and he is really steeped in the whole kind of underground metal scene, particularly around lots of underground death metal bands. And he runs a record label himself, and he reissues lots of bands on his, through his site, through his website, and where they press vinyl, and he's a pretty big guy on YouTube. Like, I notice he gets lots of hits. He does do some really great interviews with some pretty big names in the metal scene, and the death metal scene in particular. And he is good. He's got this personality that's kind of interesting, but he kind of comes across as really really crass and really I don't know, not the smartest guy. He's kind of uneducated. He comes across as kind of a doofus a little bit. When it comes to certain aspects of music, he's very, very knowledgeable. But he does have this thing of where he does, in a lot of his videos, like the headline that he'll use, or the masking to promote the show, will be him basically attacking certain fans and of that music, or certain bands. It's usually all centered on grabbing attention, and where he'll who will he shit on next, kind of a thing. And he'll be really aggressive that way, and he uses that to build his channel. And and I watch his channel. But I don't know. Sometimes I like it, and sometimes I don't. But a lot of the times, I feel like, there's times of how he will articulate things, and he'll kind of come across as like a little bit of a meathead. There's a few other people I like, there's times where I'm torn as to why I watch it. But this really weird thing happened the other day where he was doing this video, and there's a band, a black metal band, um, that has been around for quite a few years, and they're called Gorgoroth, and they are a pretty well known, one of the bigger, more modern bands in the kind of modern black metal scene. They've changed a lot over the years, but their singer Gal, who was their frontman, for like the earlier parts of their years, he really, when he was in the band, they were. I feel like Gorgoroth was riding this big wave. They were like really taking the music to a new level, and they had a certain intensity around their music and their stage presentation and their theatrics, like pretty intense music. And his whole thing was really intense, and they were really going for it. And if you ever look them up, when Gal was in the band, it's pretty intense, and it's an experience. And I really love that period of the band. After he left the band, not so much, but he's gone into doing solo work, and some of that music is really great. And he's a very creative guy. He's a painter. He has numerous different bands, numerous projects, and he's really prolific. And he is, since he's left Gorgoroth, he's kind of even become even bigger as a name. But he still has his roots definitely steeped in the traditional black metal world. But very cool, and I some of his stuff I really like and I really respect him. But about 7 or 8 years ago, he had come out as being gay. He had been in the closet and had kept it under wraps for many years that he was gay. And you know, the metal scene is obviously more, it's more male dominated, and there's more testosterone obviously in it than probably any other genre of music. But he came out of the closet and talked about his sexuality, and his has been very open about it. And years and years ago, one of the biggest people that had come out of the closet was Rob Halford from Judas Priest. And it seemed that most people respected him. There wasn't any kind of terrible homophobic backlash. People kind of embraced him for who he is, and rightfully so. So anyway, I was watching the show with this YouTube guy, and he was doing this thing of where he was, I don't know, kind of attacking the band Gorgoroth for various reasons. And in one of the clips, he basically was going after Gall, and he was saying, well, he's not really a black metal artist. He's a painter. He does all these other things, and but he doesn't even listen to black metal and all this shit. But he also referred to him as a butt boy, and he's like, well, he's a butt boy too. He's like kind of like a fag. And I was just like, what? And I'm like, the brakes suddenly went down on watching the show, and I'm like, did he just like say something totally like homophobic and just like disgustingly derogatory about this guy, where he's like basically calling him a fag? And I'm like, what? And I stopped dead in my tracks, and I'm like, wait. And then I watched it again, and he basically did that, and he completely called him out. Well, he's just a butt boy, and he's gay, and this not even doing it in this like kind of funny, you know, dumb kind of macho way. It was like he just said it, and I'm like, what? And I looked at the comments, and I'm like, did anybody else see that or hear that? And I commented on the video. I was like, did you really just say that? Did you really just call out Gall as being like a butt boy, like as a faggot in this like awful derogatory way? Like, what the fuck, you know? And I haven't heard any response. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So moving forward, I'm like, I kind of want to get to the bottom of this, because that's not cool. Like, yeah. So there's a lot of weird things, and with the internet, and I think to a degree, there are people out there that nothing really phases them anymore. They're kind of jaded or desensitized to certain things, to where people will say or do something, and there's no alarm mechanism that goes off. So that whole story to be continued. But anyway, today's show, one of the greatest aspects of, at least for me personally, doing this show and just being involved with film, and being really excited by film, is discovering a new movie. My sense of discovery is probably the biggest thing that I enjoy the most as a fan. And that goes for music too, or really anything. Discovering, it can be discovering a new artist. I mean, but mostly for me, it's around music and obviously film. And when I come across a director or a film that might be like say for example, I did a big show on Lucio Fulci, who is my favorite Italian director. If I, come across another Italian director or another movie that is similar to, say, his work that I have never heard of before, or even in Lucio Fulci's huge canon of films, I check out a film or something similar that is very much kind of in that same genre. I like, to me, that's the most fun. Where I just, it opens up another window of something else to discover and to talk about. And I enjoy that aspect probably the most out of all of the stuff. And I've been in a habit, and I've talked about it a lot before, where a lot of these movies that I buy, especially when I go to Bull Moose, and I try to buy, I try to mostly just focus on buying a lot of the Grindhouse films. A huge percentage of those films I haven't seen. And I just kind of take a chance. I kind of have gotten familiar with the companies that put out a lot of these great movies. I've, it's brought me back to lots of films that I loved when I was a kid. And through that, I've discovered all these things that are kind of related to these particular genres in the horror world, and and also in the exploitation world. And I was there. I was in Bangor a few days ago, and I didn't have very much time before I had to meet these folks that I was going up there to see. But I was kind of in the vicinity to where Bull Moose was, and I was just like, you know what, screw it, I got to go in there. And I went to Bull Moose, and it was funny because I ended up, which I kind of knew was going to happen, but I ended up losing track of time, and then I ended up being kind of late for my appointment. But it was worth it. And so I didn't have very much time, but I wanted to just go quickly through the aisles of the movie area selection, the horror Blu-ray, the horror Blu-ray section, and I snagged up a couple of movies. And one of the movies I bought, which I never seen, and I was looking at it, I was like, this looks really awesome. It was super cheap. It was like, I think it was only like $7, and that is this movie here, Rituals. And I'd never seen it before. It looked wicked interesting. And I was like, yep, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I picked it up. Again, like I said, it was super cheap. And it looked like it was a really cool slasher movie. And it was billed as a slasher film. And Rituals came out in 1977. It was directed by Peter Carter. It stars. The other thing that really interested me is it starred. The star of the movie was Hal Holbrook. Hal Holbrook is, back in the day in his generation, in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, he was kind of one of the best actors around. He's in one of my all-time favorite movies, All the President's Men. He plays Deep Throat. He's also in John Carpenter's The Fog. I mean, just an iconic actor of his generation. I think one of the best actors, and I've always been a huge fan. And his ability to be in so many different kinds of movies, and a true actor, a true chameleon. But I've always loved him, and I saw that he was the star of this. So I was like, oh wow, I didn't really know too much of Hal Holbrook's, time in the world of, low budget kind of exploitation movies. There are quite a few actors that kind of started out that eventually became pretty big Hollywood actors that kind of got their start in the world of exploitation. So I was like, this looks really interesting. This movie also stars Lawrence Dane, Robin Gimmel, uh, Gary Renick, Jack Greeley, and Murray Westgate, and Michael Zenon. Um, so I was like, this looks pretty cool. So I snagged it up. And I sat down last night and I was blown away by this movie. Totally blown away. This film also stars Lawrence Dane, and when I was watching this movie, I was like, this guy looks really, really familiar. And I watched the special features right after I finished the movie. And there's a really great interview with him that was done pretty recently. And fascinating. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating things. Um, he was a director, a producer. He was a big figure in the Canadian kind of independent world in the 70s. He worked on, he acted as a producer. He produced a bunch of films. He also acted in a bunch of films, and he also directed movies, mostly in the kind of the low budget exploitation world. Rolling Vengeance, he was in that, directed that. Running, 1979. Find the Lady, Behind the Wall, in 2008 even. He passed away fairly recently. A movie he directed, Heavenly Bodies, in 1984. Very cool, like very interesting interview. And he looked really familiar, and he was a character actor, and I've definitely seen him in a bunch of movies. So it piqued my interest even more. But this movie is something else. Like it's so gritty and so like low down and dirty. Um, and it's obviously it's a different kind of a take on it, but it's definitely a slasher movie. And I can, it's hard to generalize how to describe this movie, but I kind of feel like it has, at face value, I could describe it in a way of like if you took a movie like, say, Deliverance, directed by John Borman, starring Burt Reynolds, Ned Beatty, just one of my all-time favorite movies. Um, and I did a show on Deliverance pretty recently. It's kind of like if you take Deliverance, but you throw in it's like a you throw in it's like Deliverance meets a slasher movie. You have like the the mass killer and you threw him into that world. So it's kind of got that interesting thing of where it definitely has an influence. It definitely has this feel of Deliverance, but it's definitely a slasher movie too. And it actually has a lot of kind of it definitely is a horror movie, and it has a little bit of this occult kind of vibe to it. Um, even with the title where it's called Rituals, but it's awesome and it's super like uber low budget. The special features on here are really great because they said on how this was truly a guerrilla style that they used to make this film of where they were a lot of the takes are and the way they shot a lot of the sequences, they shot it in actual order of the film, which doesn't really happen nowadays when a movie is made, but they shot it in actual sequence. But they pretty much, because they had no budget, they did everything in one take, and they did all of their own stunt work. Where you see them trepping through the mud and trying to, cross these big, streams of water in these rapids and it's really dangerous. But the actors and the filmmakers were doing it all themselves. There were no stunt doubles, and they did all of this stuff in like one take, and it just adds so much to how gritty this movie is. It almost feels like a documentary. And the premise of the movie is about these a group of guys that are basically they go on this trip in the woods, but they're being stalked by what, and you eventually kind of find out what that's about. But they're stalked by this like serial killer in the woods, And he, in the beginning, he like kind of uses these kind of creative ways to kind of go after them, and and to eventually kill all of them. But it's really great. It's got this really mysterious um, kind of quality to it because you don't know who the killer is. He has this kind of persona of where you don't really see the killer, which I think is really awesome. But he's got this almost supernatural, like larger than life, and he's almost not even a person anymore. You almost think of him as like being this like force of evil. And there's like one scene where one of the guys gets kidnapped, and all his friends are looking for him, and they come across this they come across this big mountain ridge, and they walk up to the ridge, and they see that they find his this guy's head has been cut off and put on the stake, and then and way off in the distance you see the killer, and he's just kind of this black shape, and he's just kind of watching him, and it's really intense. And the ending for this film was great. It's super violent and it's really intense. Like Hal Holbrook is kind of on fire in this movie. Really great cast. It's super intense the whole way through, and it has this very claustrophobic kind of vibe to it. And it's I definitely consider this movie, although it is a little bit different from like say your traditional, I don't know, like slasher formula. It's definitely a slasher movie, and it does have a little bit of a supernatural element. And you combine those kinds of elements with John Borman's Deliverance, like that's kind of how this movie is. So it's very original, super gritty, super dirty, and it's it's rough. It's a rough movie, and while I was watching this movie, you feel like wow, like these guys are really going through some heavy shit to make this movie. Kind of reminded me almost like when you watch some of the classic Werner Herzog movies, where he would put his actors through hell on earth to get the right shots, and it's all real and all on camera. It kind of reminded me of that, where it's like it's brutal, and you're like these guys are really like kind of getting fucked up on screen, and there's obviously no stunt doubles, and they're risking their lives, to kind of make this movie, and it's brutal, but really great. 1977, and this transfer of this movie on Blu-ray is killer. Um, and I've said too, I love all kinds of movies, but my favorite style uh, that I always go to and I always seek out is the slasher horror exploitation genre. Hands down, that is my favorite, and that was when I picked this movie up the other day. That was the determining factor as to what made me buy it when I saw that it was a slasher movie, and obviously a little bit of a different kind of a take or a different kind of uh, thing to it, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy it. It looks really great. I love Hal Holbrook. And the other funny thing that I do is I always, when I buy a movie, especially when I go to Bull Moose, that's a thing. I always check when the movie came out. I always check out the. Obviously, I read a little bit about the movie. I check out the reviews on the movie, and which is a big determining factor for me for me to buy it, and especially if it's a movie I've never seen like this one. And also, I'll check the date. If it's from like the 70s, early 80s, I usually 100% will buy it. And of course, if it has some special features on there, I will buy it. It's funny; those are usually the determining factors for me, and also what company's putting it out. This was put out by Code Red, which Code Red is a company that does put out a lot of like low budget exploitation movies, but I believe they went out of business a few years ago. I probably own a couple of their movies, but I don't know much about the company. But I do. I did hear last year that they kind of went out of business, but I know that that's what they do with their that what they did in the past was they put out a lot of like of these low budget kind of exploitation movies, and this is an awesome movie, a super cool new discovery for me, and I love this. And it's one, like I said, I'm a huge Hal Holbrook fan, and this is one of, I don't know, I kind of feel like he plays such a unique character in this, where he is like uh, he's like really a broken character, but then he also becomes this kind of, he becomes a pretty badass character, especially towards the end. But then you see him go through all of these incredibly vulnerable, like broken stages, and it's great. It's super awesome, and he kind of, the other interesting thing about this movie is it's also a study of how, these guys that are in this completely horrible situation, where they have no food and they're just being broken down, and you see how they start turning on each other. That's the other big aspect of this movie. And so the dynamic between the characters is really interesting, because that's kind of the main focus, is how, this like killer, this slasher killer, is also like kind of just mentally breaking down these guys by like taking everything away, like where they have nothing to survive, and what do they do? And you see psychologically how they just kind of lose their minds, and it's awesome. It's, yeah, I highly recommend it. 1977 Rituals, starring Hal Holbrook. Really awesome, uh, grimy, low budget slasher uh, exploitation movie. Super cool. So this is Jason Dean. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.